Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Cerius Leadership. Whether you are growing your business, growing your career, or possibly both, thank you for listening. I am joined today by Darby Vannier. And Darby, I'm excited for our topic today. I will say that you have one of my favorite online descriptions I have ever seen. And it says, you are an operations leader helping founders, CEOs, and boards make the right decisions, not just the easy decisions to help them scale. I can't think of a better jumping off point than starting with maybe clarifying or some examples on what you mean by the right decisions, not just the easy decisions.
Yeah, so these are things that every business, small or large, no matter where you're at, encounter all the time. Now, unfortunately, huge organizations with bureaucracies and whatnot, decisions are a little bit more difficult. So smaller and entrepreneurial companies have an easier time with this. But essentially, my whole career, I've taken this idea. And basically what it is let's think about what's the right decision for this organization or department or whatever it is you're working on. What's the right decision long term for us? Because we could make an easy decision that helps us today, that gets us by, that even maybe feels really good right now. But 2 years from now, 3 years from now, it may come back to haunt us. Whereas the tougher decision, maybe that was the right decision, even though it maybe required an investment of time or money or people or whatever, and it was going to be hard and it was going to require a lot of work. But 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, it turns out that was the right decision in the long run. I have a good example of this. Years ago, I was running an organization. It was a nonprofit organization, and I had come in and taken it over at a difficult time. They were kind of on the brink of collapse at the time I took over. So we had a lot of fixing to do. And we spent a long time fixing things and getting things up to speed and just really flowing as a business. Once we got past that, we started taking a look at, okay, we have this software system that we utilize for our business that helps us to provide the services that we provide. And it takes so many steps to accomplish one little task. Just to print off this one particular document that we needed to provide for clients, it took something like 13 or 14 steps for one of my team members to do this. So as we're looking at replacing this, there's options of sticking with what we have and just dealing with it. There's options of find some other off-the-shelf product to replace it with, or the option of let's go out and see what it would take to create something that is appropriate for our organization. Because in the industry that I was in, there is no other organization. In fact, this company had no competitors in the whole United States. So an off-the-shelf thing is never going to be quite right. So we went out and we actually hired a company to come in and help us write an RFP, because this was going to be so detailed and consume so much of our company. And then we put this RFP out for bid. We got responses back, a lot of them, and evaluated them. And as I'm talking to the board of directors about this, it's a significant investment. I mean, this was quite a while ago. This is a small nonprofit organization. The initial investment, I think, was something like $150,000. And for this company, that was a lot of money. Just a couple of years prior, they didn't even have that amount in the bank. So significant. And that's kind of how I started thinking about this was, I kind of talked to the board and I said, look, this is a difficult decision for us and it is a lot of money, but I think it's going to be the right decision for us long term, because as we grow, I can already see this, like that one thing that took 13 or 14 steps just to print something off, it consumed so much time. It required so much employee effort just to accomplish a simple task. And that wasn't the only thing. The whole system was like that. I said, if we create the right system, we'll be able to do a lot more with the same amount or less people in the future, and it'll make growing a lot easier. And ultimately, they decided, let's go down that path. And it was a difficult decision. And as we went, we were very careful because it was a lot of money. And the vendor we were working with knew it was a lot of money for us. But It actually turned out exactly like I thought it would. About 2 or 3 years from then, we were doing double the amount of transactions with the same size of team, actually a few less, a few people left, and we just didn't need to replace them. We didn't lay anybody off, but as people left, we just evaluated. And the new system allowed us to do that. And it shifted the entire trajectory of the organization. The organization prior about 15% of their transactions were online or automatic transactions. Everything else had to be an interaction with an employee.
Mhm.
After the switch, that went up to somewhere between 95 and 98% of transactions were completed online. So as you can imagine, that alone just increased efficiency. And going a few more years down the road, we got to 2008, and the economics of the whole country were not great, if you remember right.
Yeah.
And it did affect our industry, and things slowed down. And really, as I looked at it and thought, you know what? If we hadn't made that move, we would still be with a huge staff. Actually, we would have probably had to be double the size because of the transaction we were doing. And now we wouldn't be able to afford it. We'd be in a really bad position. Whereas with this new system that helped us create so many more efficiencies, we were able to keep everybody going and get through that time period and then continue to grow after that. So I just had numerous experiences like that. And that's what I mean by, sometimes it's a difficult decision. It's not always the easy one that's the right decision.
You mentioned that a couple years later, you looked back and said, wow, that was the right decision. It's that hindsight is 2020. How do you know that that's going to be the right decision? I think that's where so many of us struggle with what is that right decision for 1 year, 3 year, 5 years down the road? Because then we need to know where are we going and what's coming down the road.
Yeah, it's not always the easiest thing to do. A lot of it is feeling. Certainly, there is a certain amount of planning and risk mitigation that you can put into
Mhm.
it. You have to do what your organization is comfortable with. If you're investing money, then obviously you have to be comfortable with that money. If you're investing a bunch of team members' time, that's a little bit different. Sometimes that's easier. Yeah, it stinks if it doesn't work out that you wasted all of that time, but at least it didn't affect you majorly financially. And certainly, I've had cases that it didn't work out. And before, nothing on the scale of the one that did work. But we've all had cases where we have tried to implement something and it didn't work out quite right. And I
Mhm.
think what you do is the key with those is you just have to really pivot quickly. Like as soon as you realize it's not working, we need to scrap it and go with some other plan, or we need to just shift directions a little bit and alter it and see if we can make it so that it actually does function and work out. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of experience and a lot of feeling behind helping to make that decision. And of course, it does require a certain amount of what level of risk you willing to take.
And I can imagine there's some type of decision-making criteria as you're weighing what is going to be the right decision for the future. You've got to have some sense of what do we want in the future? Where do we want to end up? Like in your case, you said, we want to be able to do a lot more with less. This makes sense. What if what they want in the future was not to go in that direction? So how do you help companies figure out where do we want to end up so we've got a better perspective and almost a crystal ball as we're making these decisions?
Yeah, certainly the main thing I will say is having a really strong strategic plan that everybody's behind will help you in all major significant decisions, because that should guide all of your decision making. You have lots of systems out there. There's the big one is Entrepreneur Operating System, or EOS, Traction, if you've heard of that. And it really is a good model. There's a lot of them that are they have different names, very similar though, where you start out with a huge goal that's way far out there, not really well defined, kind of blurry, and then you work backwards from that. You go down to 5 years or 3 years and you define it a little bit more. And it's not about what are we going to do by 3 years from now or 5 years. It's about what does this company look like? Like, what do I want this organization to look like 3 years from now? And you list those things out. And then you go to 1 year, and that gets a little bit more specific. That gets into some of the, yeah, what do we want it to look like in a year? But it also is, here's the things we're going to do. And then you can use that to do 90 days. But that helps you in your whole decision making, the decision making criteria that you talked about,
Mhm.
because you're able to sit down and look at, okay, we're considering this investment, whatever it is. Might be investing in a new marketing program, might be creating a new product or new service or whatever. Where does it fit in this plan? Does it fit in this company 3 years from now? If the answer is no, then you better strongly evaluate whether that's the right decision. And if it is ultimately, sometimes you look at it and you're like, things have changed, and I do think this is the right decision. If you look at
Mhm.
it and you think that, and you decide that's where you need to go, then you should probably readjust your strategic plan, because that means that's important enough to be considered. If it's in there, that makes that decision a lot easier. Then you get into the specifics of, can we afford it now? What's the timeline for making this happen? Is it something that we have the investment to do it all in the next 90 days? Investment meaning money, time, whatever, capacity, to do it in the next 90 days, or do we need to do it over the next 3 quarters or the next year or something like that? Sometimes it's a multi-year thing, and it can
Mhm.
be done in stages. But that will really help you. And it also helps do some of that risk mitigation that I talked about before, because you can spread that out as is comfortable for your organization. High growth organization, they may just say, somebody that has venture capital, they may just say, we're going all in, we're going to do this in the next 90 days. Sometimes they'll push it even further, 30 days or whatever it is for some huge initiative. If you're a
Mhm.
self-funded organization that you're trying to fund your own growth, it might take more than that. It might take a year. So that's how you have to look at those when you're making those decisions. But certainly having that strategic plan built, reevaluating that, looking at it on a regular basis, everything should relate back to that.
And you mentioned we may just do it all now. Sometimes we can't do it all now, and we need to prioritize, which is it's almost a dirty word with business owners. Sometimes you've got to pick one and you've got to prioritize using that lens of here's where we want to end up, here's what the organization needs to look like. What are some ways that you help companies kind of prioritize those initiatives? Because sometimes we just can't do it all at once. As much as an owner, I want it all done yesterday. You've now painted me the picture of what my organization should look like. I want to look like that now.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of three things that you have to look at. You want to look at risk, you want to look at investment, and you want to look at impact. So I want to do things for an organization. If they want to have a big impact quickly, then we got to look at things that are high impact, low to medium risk,
Mhm.
low to medium investment. Well, that may change than if you can do high impact, high risk, and high investment. That's a way different situation. So what that means is as I'm looking with companies and I'm working with them to understand, here's your end goal. And this happens.
Mhm.
So the scenario you brought up brings up the whole thing with high visionary entrepreneurs too,
Yeah.
because high visionary entrepreneurs, in their heads, when they think of an idea or they get behind something, in their head, it's done. Like, no steps to get
Yes.
there. It's done. So let's do it now. And ultimately, I work with a lot of small companies. That's just not realistic in most small companies to move that quickly. You can't move that quickly money wise. You can't move that quickly time wise for your team members and for your clients. It takes a
Mhm.
little bit to shift. So you have to really get in with that visionary and explain, okay, well, here's the 50 or 100 things that have to be done to get there. Let's figure out what are the things we can do that are high impact, that can be done relatively quickly and easily? Let's do some of those things so that we can see if it's going to work well, and we can already start to have an impact. You can start to develop things. I worked with a company at one point who did leadership development, and we had leadership development programs that ran 12 to 18 months long. And we had a goal of altering the whole program into a brand new pathway, all new curriculum, everything. Well, that's not something you can do overnight. I mean, this was a lot of stuff that had to be written, that had to be created. So what we did was is we broke that down and we said, okay, what is our highest impact as far as what's the curriculum that we use the most. And we started with that, and we started releasing a few pieces here and there and testing them out, and then we could make adjustments. And it took a period of time to get it all completed, but ultimately that whole pathway was created. So that's really, really what it takes is just really getting down to prioritizing those things based on, like I said, impact, risk, and investment.
And as we're setting those goals and those targets, I can imagine some of us set really big visions and big aspirations for our companies. How do you work on setting those realistic targets? I may, you know the famous one, I want to double my company in 3 years. That may not be realistic. How do you go about vetting out how attainable or what it will take to get there with those targets? Because as we started off, all of our decisions on a day-to-day are going towards that end. We want to make sure we can achieve that end.
Yeah, I think it goes back to having that strategic plan and understanding, okay, if we start way out here and then work backwards, because what you have to look at, using that example, let's say I want to double my company in 2 years or 3 years. I'm a $5 million company. I want to go to 10. So what you have to do is, and that's easy for a visionary to say, that's what I want to do. They can message that, they can get their team members excited. And then you got somebody like me who's going, wait a minute, what's it going to take to do that? So you have to sit down, and there's a lot of things you have to look at. One aspect is the people aspect. Like, what is the organization going to look like at $10 million if we're at 5? And we have whatever 20 employees now? What does that mean? Does that mean double that then? Does that mean 40 employees? Does it mean 50? Does it mean 30? And then after you determine that, is that even feasible for your organization? Like, can we, that's 2 years from now or 3 years from now. In reality, you got to get there. If you're shooting for the end of the 3rd year, you probably have to have most stuff done by the end of the 2nd year, beginning of the 3rd year. So the runway is short when you're doing that. So you have to look at it and say, okay, is it even feasible for us to hire that number of people and train them? Depending on what your business is, that can take a lot of time. Okay, it's feasible, but it's from a hiring standpoint. Is it feasible from a financial standpoint? Because that means we're going to have to hire a whole bunch of people and train them before we have the revenue coming in to pay that payroll. So we have an investment we're going to have to make. Like, is that feasible for our organization? Do we have the money to do that? So you have that aspect. And then you have to look at what's the investment beyond that. If it's going to require additional software, and if you're doing a custom software, that's going to take time. And what does that look like from a resource standpoint, from an internal staff standpoint, and the cost associated there? Where's that money coming from? Is that feasible as well? Then you really get down to looking at, okay, is this what the company really wants? You're saying, I want to grow. And I've had founders say before, I want to double in size in 2 years. Why? Why do you want to double? I just want to double. Why though? Like, is it you want to have an impact? You want to, what is it that you want to impact? Because just wanting to double is not a good a reason to do it, because that's not a plan. So you have to really get them around the idea of, this is what your organization is going to look like, double the size. If you wanted to shift in new directions, what it means is, if you want to double in size, you're not going to be able to do it with your current products or services, which means you're going to have to either acquire another company, again, more investment in money and time, or you're going to have to do product or service development and develop something entirely new, because you can't expand the market of what you're currently at. So there's just a lot of those considerations that have to go in. And those are the conversations that I have with entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs. You have to really get them down to that level at some point, which can be very frustrating for high vision people. And it takes some time. You can't just blurt it all out at once. You got to kind of go with evidence. So I tend to ask a lot of those questions. Well, how many team members is that going to take? What is that going to look like from a product standpoint? Can you do it with your current set of products? Asking all of those questions formulating some of these things together and then going back and talking with them and saying, it's feasible, but here's what this looks like. Do you want to take this on right now? Is that what your goals are? And sometimes that's not what their goals were. They
Mm-hmm.
like doing what they're doing and they'd rather grow at a little bit slower rate or whatever. And sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm all in. Let's go for it. And then you have to start making the plans associated with that.
I love that you went to uh, we've got this goal setting. Why is that the goal? When we set the goal, did we have a reason for it? Hit pause and step back and say, does that still hold true? Is that still why we're going after that goal? Are we going after it because it's the only goal that we have to go after right now? Do we need to reset that goal? So as you're walking through with them, either resetting it or helping them maybe set that goal, that 5 year, that 3 year, that 1 year goal for the first time, what are some prompts that maybe help them with as to why, or questions that we can ask ourselves to really get to the heart of what's the outcome we're looking for?
With small businesses, the main question when you're talking far out there is, what do you want to accomplish? What is your ultimate desire here? Why did you start this company? Or why are you starting this
Mm-hmm.
company? And that's the discussion that should really be had first. So the leadership development company that I worked with, the CEO started the company because he wanted to have an impact on those around him and help other people and other businesses to grow. So that's a great motivation. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really big on really understanding why for clients that I work with, and when I've worked with companies directly, companies that I work with, it's important for me to understand the why they're doing what they do. If it's just about making money, I want to make money too, but that's not really a long-term sustainable thing for my happiness. It's not easy to be passionate about it versus an organization that has a specific goal that they're trying to accomplish. And yes, make money and make those around them money as well. So that's really what I start with, is really getting them to understand and explain back to me why it is they started what they started, because that's going to help. Because sometimes you'll get suggestions, like if you just ask, where do you want to be in 10 years? Like, what's your huge goal out there? Where do you want to be in 10 years? You'll get things that are just crazy. That is like, I want the company to look like this. It's a totally different company, almost a different industry. And so you're looking at it and you say, well, then you have to back up to that why. Okay, why did you start what you started? Okay, you like that. Is that what this
Mm-hmm.
is that you're explaining? Well, no, it's not. Okay, so tell me why you want to get there. Because it could be valid. It could be that they want to shift their entire focus, and that's fine, but they better be dang committed to that, and they better understand the implications of that, because that shift from this type of company to that type of company might mean a total transition in everything that you do, and how you sell, and how you hire, and the type of people that work for you. You have to transition the type of customer and what that customer demographic looks like. And that's a big shift. So they better understand what that is before you set that as the big goal out there. There's also implications internally with that. Because I have had founders too who have said, yeah, that's where I want to go. And they set this out there and it was so fuzzy and so blurry, which they typically are when you're that far out, and that's fine in general. But it was so out there that their team members looked at it and they didn't understand. They're like, I don't understand where we're headed. It made it hard for them to be behind it. They could do the day to day and they all did their jobs and everything. Well, what happened is after about a year or two of having this big goal out there that they kept saying that they were striving for, eventually the founder realized that's not really what we're going for. And they switched it to something that made much more sense for what they were actually wanting. And then the team members were able to get behind it a lot easier. It doesn't mean that, you're going to have people working against you, but it's much easier if they understand where they're headed, what does success look like, and they are passionate about whatever it is. You're going to have a lot easier time with those team members, definitely, as they're out there selling, as they're out there delivering services,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
I always like when we've got those big, audacious goals as founders, as visionaries, as leaders, and even in our own careers, as we talk through with executives, where do you want to end up? Whether it's a title, a company, a certain paycheck, a certain role, a certain impact, we're all constantly making these decisions in our lives, maybe not just company owners. And as we're setting those goals, sometimes it's well, if we're only measuring the end point, it is real easy to stop halfway and say, I'm not getting anywhere. We want those incremental measurements because every day isn't going to break through to say we're 25% of the way to that 5-year plan. As you're setting those incremental goals, and it also, to your point, you can assess along the way, which brings me to the big question that I'm sure gets asked a lot. My husband's in the military. They don't do anything without saying, are we ready? It's that operational readiness. Say, are we ready to take on this goal? Are we ready and set up for success? How do you help analyze or assess the organization as a whole to say we're ready to start taking these steps towards this milestone? Because a lot of times we're not ready. We don't have the finances. We don't have the mindset for the growth. We don't have the right culture, the right team. What lens are you using to help them figure out, are we set up and ready for this?
Well, I think that first it takes a lot of questions, and I use that a lot, that answer a lot, but it's going to require a lot of questions because I'm going to need to understand a lot of things. So when CEO says this is what we want to do, and then I go into those questions and I start to try to understand the organization. It's much easier after you've worked with them for a period of time, whether you're internal or you're external and you've worked with them for a period of time, because then you're able to quickly know, I'm not sure if that's feasible with your current financial situation, with your current team, whatever it is. But if you don't know that, then you need to ask those questions. So when you're in a strategic planning session, which is where these things usually come up with them, then you're going to need to get down to, okay, what does that look like? Again, what does that look like for your team? Okay, that's what it looks like. So you talk through that. Do you have the team that can do that right now? No, you don't. Do you have the capacity to hire them right now? Capacity meaning just the time to be able to do an interview process and develop it, but also the finances to bring people in before there's revenue coming in or whatever that looks like. And you talk through that same thing on the finance side. And you go through what do those dollars look like and really help them assess. It's really, I mean, my job is more to help somebody get there by asking the right questions, because ultimately what will happen is I'll ask enough questions and they'll answer enough times that they'll go, yeah, I don't think we can do that in 90 days or whatever. And they'll say, okay, let's look at what this looks like further out. And I have been part of organizations where we've had those conversations where we have to, like, we have some really great goals up there on the whiteboard for consideration for this 90 days that are going to have a huge impact on the organization. And we had to turn them away. I mean, we had to basically put them in the parking lot on the back burner because we looked at it and said, with the business that we have coming up that we have to serve, with the team that we have, there's just no capacity to have our team working on those things right now. So it's a hard decision because you're looking at it going, when it's done, it's going to have such a huge impact. And that's the hard decision, easy decision thing that I was talking about before. The right decision in that case was to put it on the back burner, unfortunately. The easy decision would have been, and the exciting decision would have been, let's do it. This is exciting. Let's do this. And then you get into that quarter and you either overwhelm and bury your people, or you don't accomplish the goal in the long run. And that becomes a frustration and it becomes a negative way to finish up the quarter, which you don't want. And then you're back to assessing it anyway. So that's the type of discussion that you're having. And that is really, like you said, that's why it's nice to have those milestones and everything. That's why I really do like models like EOS, because in the olden days, when you did strategic planning, you get your 5-year strategic plan or your 10-year strategic plan, and it was this big document, and you put it on the shelf, and it just sat there. You never did anything with it. Whereas when you have this and it's all broke down all the way down to 90 days and you're constantly referencing back to that, as long as you hold yourself accountable or you're working with somebody who holds you accountable to those things, it does really help you progress. And you can really see, okay, we did what we said we were going to do in 90 days. And you can see how that helps that 1 year. And then you get to the end of the year and you're like, wow, we accomplished 98% of what we wanted to accomplish. That means we are that much closer to that 3 year. Like it does really help you.
And you're able to reset and say, we accomplished this because we want to do this other thing next. We've now accomplished this. Is it going to help us accomplish the next thing, or do we need to change that next thing because there's a better bridge that we can build to get to our end goal? I think that pausing and looking back and then looking forward, you mentioned that pitfall of, I call it shiny object syndrome. We can do all 5 of these things. I know we can do, and it'll be so much better on the end. And sometimes you've got to edit those out. What are some other pitfalls that as we get so focused on that end goal and we're laying out what it takes to get there, what are some other kind of traps to avoid as we're doing that?
The big one is don't forget your current business. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. And a lot of times you have to have that conversation with people because that's where your money's coming from right now, especially if you're self-funding your growth, especially in those cases, because you have to take care of the business you have. You have to keep growing your current business because that's helping you fund where you're headed. And the pitfall is if you overwhelm your team and you are focusing all on these goals, and we as leaders and certainly founders have a tendency to focus on the big things, not as much on the day-to-day. So we're getting updates and the goals aren't going as well as we had hoped, and they're not progressing far enough, and that upsets us, and then we put pressure on. And then what happens is you see your team start to go, okay, that's what's important. So I need to focus my time on working on this goal or this rock. And then your service starts to suffer. And then eventually that's going to affect your client retention, and that affects revenue. And you don't want those things to happen. So that's the big pitfall is anytime you're assessing, and that's what it comes down to, that like that decision I mentioned where we said, and we really want to do this goal, but we just can't do it with our team. It would bury them. It just was not the right thing to do. And it would have affected team health. It would have affected client retention eventually because of those things. So that's the major pitfall there is that. The other thing I would say is just constantly assessing as you're working through them, and don't be afraid. I'm not a big fan of giving up too early, but don't be afraid to scrap a goal. If you get 6 weeks into a quarter and then your leadership team, you're looking at it and you're like, this didn't turn out how we thought it was going to be. Like, this isn't actually what we should be doing to make that happen. It happens because when you're brainstorming in a room, you're trying to come up with what are those rocks and what are those big things we need to accomplish. It's just not enough time if you're in a 1 day or 2 day session. So you do the best that you can. Sometimes after you get 4 to 6 weeks in, I'd say that's about the timing. Like 4 to 6 weeks in, you can really start to see this isn't what we thought it was. We either need to pivot this rock or we need to scrap it entirely. Don't be afraid to do that because you still are shooting for that 1 year plan, that 3 year picture, whatever it is. And if you get partway through a quarter and you decide this isn't accomplishing any of those things, why would you keep working on it? It doesn't make any sense. So, and it happens because then you have more details. You've gotten into some of the scheduling of it and what it looks like, and you've talked to team members about it. Whatever it is, you've learned more information and you decide this isn't what we want. So I would say that's a pitfall because we as leaders have a hard time giving up on things. Don't be afraid to do that in the right case.
Iterate, because none of us are 100% on everything there. The other thing we see is as you go through that growth curve, some of our roles need to adjust. Some of our responsibilities need to change. And having gone through that as an owner, I think one of the toughest things was what my role needs to be, what my responsibilities need to be, and that less tangibility on that day to day, especially whether you're doubling growth from 1 million to 2 or 5 to 10, that's, as you mentioned, your organization has to look different from that. How do you help owners figure out when they hit that point, what they need to, either delegate, give up, stop doing, how to adjust from that day to day doing the business to leading the business?
I would say I don't know that there's a silver bullet to that one. There
Mhm.
are so many differences between individuals and between individual founders in personalities, in control level. You have to kind of assess it based on the situation and the individual. Ultimately, what I will say is that in small companies, it goes without saying that as we run our own companies, we started out, we were in control of everything. That's where our money was coming from to support our families. We had to bring in the revenue, we had to provide the service, whatever. And as you grow and you get more team members and everything, it does force you to pivot a little bit. But it is difficult for founders to release that control because in their heads, they're still the one ultimately responsible for providing for their families and taking care of their
Mhm.
own and even taking care of their team members. I think that's something that's overlooked by team members in small companies.
Uh,
You don't understand the amount of stress that most entrepreneurs, not all, I will say, but most entrepreneurs have a lot of stress early on just in making sure that they can make payroll and pay you because they know you have kids, you have spouses, you have people you need to take care of, and they want you to be able to do that, and they want to do that for you. So all of those things are inside the head of every founder.
yeah.
So making that transition for them is going to be difficult. And so you just have to have the conversations with them as to almost like where it's almost that impact discussion. So where is the biggest impact? Like what's the best thing you can do for your organization? And sometimes that means stepping back, especially for a very high visionary person. They when they get to that point where they're starting to bring in, as EOS would call them, an integrator, but we'll just call them a
Mhm.
COO or an operations type person. They need to release some control to that individual to run the day to day because honestly, if they're very high visionary, they're not the best person to be doing that. So helping them understand that and what that means for them, what that frees them up to do, and what they are able to do then to help the company is what you have to help them understand. And that's different depending on every situation and every company. In some cases, you want to free up that CEO to have them go do the high dollar sales because they are the most passionate person about their product or service because they've built this whole company. So in some cases, that's what you want to free them up for. In some cases, you want to free them up to just be there to generate the ideas and to help create the culture and lead the organization forward and provide motivation and excitement to the team. Sometimes that's the priority. So it just kind of depends on what needs to be done. And then as far as when that needs to happen, again, it is different. Sometimes in some companies, you might be at $2 million and be needing to make some of those decisions. Sometimes
Mhm.
you could be an $8 million company and still be fine. But eventually, you're going to have those discussions and really get them to understand and take a hard look at. And it also comes down to what do they want to be doing? Because sometimes, depending on how long they've been doing this, sometimes they want to step back. And sometimes that's the right decision for the company too. Like they want to step out entirely. They want to come and participate in planning on a quarterly basis, but they want to go do something else. That might be the right decision for them as well. You certainly see a lot of cases. I actually just saw an announcement this week from somebody I know who he was the founder of the company and everything, and he just transitioned out of the CEO role, hired a CEO, and he's focusing on doing further investment to expand the company. And that was what's right for them right now, and that's what needed to be done.
We're seeing a lot more of that, of the either owner or owner founder stepping out of the CEO role or stepping out of the president CEO role bringing in someone else so that they can either be that brand ambassador, that chief development officer, that it's almost getting back to your why of why did I start this company and what was I passionate about? It takes on a whole new life as it grows. And we almost circle back to let's go back to doing what we love doing originally and let someone else who really enjoys growing the company. It's such a great exercise to go through because you've got to have some self-awareness, but once you go through it, you're able to help your leadership team go through it because you've got a team, they've got a team, their team's going to have a team, and so on. I know you talk a lot about different types of leadership, styles of leadership, and one of them I really want to hit into is that informal versus formal leadership, because I think it's a great topic to go into.
Yeah, so I talk about this in my book, the difference between informal and formal leadership and how important it is. Because I think there's just this tendency when you talk about leadership or leaders, when you talk to people, there's this tendency amongst people who don't have those or anybody reporting to them. Well, I'm not a leader. I don't need this information. That's not exactly true because we have informal leadership every day in our lives. So you participate within an organization, just being, maybe you're somebody who's been there a long time and you're the go-to and you can answer all the questions. You may not have anybody reporting to you. It could be an executive assistant who sits at the front, but they've been there forever. So everybody goes to them to ask them questions because they know either they'll know the answer or they'll know who they need to go ask. That person's a leader. They don't have anybody reporting to them. They're a leader within that organization. They're having a huge impact on that organization, whether they know it or not. It's just a problem because a lot of times individuals, they don't realize the impact that they're having. It could be that you're working within a particular team and just the ideas that you bring and how you help participate in the discussion or even guide the discussion. Again, you don't have anybody reporting to you. You may not even be leading that team, but you are a leader within that organization. So I try to get people to look at that a lot differently because formal leadership is what people would really more term as reporting structure. And just because you have somebody reporting to you also doesn't mean you're a leader. It could mean that you just had a lot of experience and you got promoted, but you're not really great at leading people. And yeah, there's still a certain amount of leadership, but I certainly know people I would not call leaders who have people reporting to them. So I don't think that's a good definition of leadership in general. That might be what formal leadership is, but certainly informal leadership is huge. And that goes outside of business as well. Every day we all participate in our communities. We sit on committees. I'm on a board for my daughter's school. So I'm a leader within that organization and helping to guide that and that process. So just those things alone, and unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, there are certainly celebrities, there are sports figures and everything out there that are seen as leaders, whether they want to be or not. And it's not about anybody reporting to them. It just has to do with impact that they have and visibility. So those bring responsibilities with them, obviously, as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that really having people understand at a very early age. I have discussions when I speak to college students about this all the time, because a lot of times, even in college, they're not looking at themselves necessarily as leaders, and they're already having an impact and they're already showing leadership. So they need to learn those things.
I love that sometimes it's difficult for us to identify do we have the future leaders of our company inside, or do we need to go outside? Or should we start developing them now for 2 to 3 years down the road when we know we're going to need it? And using that lens, sometimes there's all the assessments out there, but we know they might be good at their job. Looking around the company and saying, who in the company does everyone just go to for answers? When there's a problem, where do they go to help get it figured out. Who seems to want the person to always volunteer saying, I'll take care of it? And you probably see that on and off throughout your company over a period of time. That may be another evaluation lens to say, let me work with that individual a little bit more. Let's see if they want to step into formal leadership because they're just naturally doing it informally. What do I need to do to help them develop those skills?
Yeah, I'm very big on developing my team. I always have been from the very start of my career. And certainly as I work with individuals and I see the excitement that they have and the passion that they bring to their position and their role, those seeing those things helps make the decision to spend good amount of time with them, to offer up some opportunities for development. Certainly a number of years ago, I was CEO of an organization, hired an individual to come in to a customer service representative position. And they were in that position for many years. We actually had some attendance issues early on and everything that we had to deal with, which was interesting. And then they corrected the situation and they ended up being a great team member. And eventually, I had somebody who left an assistant manager role. That's not what it was called, but that's the easiest way to explain it. And they were interested and they moved into that role. And we had already been working on developing them. And it gave me a good opportunity then to sit down and offer up some additional resources externally where we got them a coach and got them into some things. And they just had not been exposed to any sort of leadership programs, no college degree, but they had the passion for the organization. They had the passion for what they did. They definitely were hardworking. And they took that development program and ran with it and accomplished amazing things. I saw a huge change, not that there was anything bad going on before, but just a huge change in how they were able to then start to manage and interact and lead others. And they took full advantage of the opportunity that was given to them. And later, when I left that organization, they continued on there. And for a long time, they didn't have a replacement for me, even though I gave the board plenty of time to do that. But you know how that works sometimes with organizations. So this individual ran the organization for many months before a new leader came in, and they continued to grow there and everything. And I've seen that multiple times throughout my career. So identifying those individuals and giving them the opportunity. Sometimes individuals will come to you directly and ask, and I will generally have a conversation and ask some questions around why they're interested in that and everything, because maybe I didn't see, because obviously I'm not going to necessarily see everything every day. But yeah, anytime you can offer those opportunities to develop individuals and then see if they take full advantage of them, see how that works with them, that will help you in the long run. It gets back to that whole thing. You've seen that meme or heard that saying of, what if I pay to develop them and they leave? Well, what if you don't and they stay? I mean, it's valid.
Exactly.
Like I want people to be seeking other things. I want people to want to grow in their lives, and if it's right for them to move on, then I will help them do that. I have always said in my whole career, I always want people underneath me to be looking at me saying they want to take my job. That does not bother me at all. I want them to be doing that because that means they are dedicated to growing within the organization and they have some loyalty there and they want to actually have that development.
It's one of my favorite things as we're vetting out, candidates, talking to executives, those discussions with executives who have helped build leadership teams. They've helped build leadership inside of companies, to talk through the examples that you just gave of, tell me when you've mentored someone, when you've developed them, and then what did they grow into? What did they go on to do? Because when you've done that, you're tracking their career, you're invested in the career, you're committed to them, whether they're staying with that company or going somewhere else, or you're staying with that company or going somewhere else. None of us are meant to necessarily do what we're doing at that time forever. So leaning into that discussion of, whether it's here or somewhere else, how can I support you in that path. Going back to what we started at is making the right decision, not just the easy decision. You've got to be able to see what's ahead and plan for what's ahead. The more you've got that visibility, you're able to plan out the leadership path for the individuals as well. And I always love good takeaway advice, especially starting with that make the right decision, not just the easy decision. What advice would you give to leadership, whether it's founders, owners, or somewhat part of the leadership team, to make it a little easier to make the right decision so those two aren't always contradictory? Sometimes they can be the same thing.
Well, there's a lot of pieces of advice that I would consider giving, and certainly there's not a shortage of advice. If you're on LinkedIn at all, you can just scroll through and find that. One thing I would say is just in decision making, there's three main types of decisions that you make. There's command, consensus, and consult. So command decisions is I'm just going to decide. We're going to move forward. This is what we're doing. Works in some cases. You don't want to utilize that. You want to utilize that for insignificant things. Like I'm planning a meeting and this is what we're doing and this is the date we're meeting or whatever. There are unfortunately leaders who use command decision making for big things on setting a goal or rock or whatever. That doesn't always work. There are consensus decisions, which is what it sounds like. We're all going to agree. Those take a long time. Command decisions, quick. Only I have to make it. Consensus decisions take a long time, so you have to use those sparingly as well. As you have discussions, if you're going to say we all have to agree, it's going to take a long time. But they have high buy-in. Command decisions have low buy-in oftentimes. High buy-in on consensus. Then there's consult decisions. Consult decisions is probably what you should be using 80 or 90% of the time. That is, we're going to have a discussion. Ultimately, I still have to make the final decision, but we're going to have a discussion so I get everybody's input and I learn from all of you and everything. So the buy-in is still high enough that you can move forward and you get all of those things. So that's the first thing I would say is just understand when you're making decisions, what's your goal? The other piece of advice that I would say, again, I'm going to ignore all of the other general business advice, and I'm just going to say one thing I always say to individuals that's overlooked is just be kind. Everybody has their own stuff going on in their lives. You don't know all of the stuff going on in somebody's life. I guarantee it, no matter how well you think you know them, especially as an employer for working with team members, you don't know their lives. And so give a little bit of grace. People are going to have bad days. I've had team members who worked for me who yelled at me before. I don't fire them over it. Yeah, we're going to have a discussion about it, but something else is bothering them. Something's going on in their life, just like I have things going on in my life. So give people a little bit of grace because just in general, that is going to help your organization grow. People are going to see you do it, which means they're going to do it. That's going to help your team health, the team harmony, whatever you want to call it, which ultimately is going to help your organization in the long run. And I think that's something that's often overlooked. So that's something I like to mention.
Thank you. And I think that be kind, it's something that seems so obvious and so intuitive, but we forget, and we probably all need a big poster on the wall to be a little more empathetic or understanding of what kind of a day or anyone's having and how we can help them in that. Thank you for that reminder. And Darby, thank you for all your advice and your insights. I always enjoy hearing, especially when someone has been in the role of COO or CEO, you've grown companies, you have done that, and you've got a template, a formula. I really appreciate you walking me through that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I always enjoy talking. So
never short for advice or guidance. Thank you so much for joining me today on Cerius Leadership, Darby.
absolutely.
Take care.